Hey everyone, please support what I do to help keep Greyhawk alive by subscribing to the channel. Also, please consider becoming a channel member to get early access to videos, exclusive live chats, quarterly adventure modules, and more. Thanks, and enjoy the show.
So a good villain is something that's really important to just about any game of D&D or any other RPG for that matter. So I wanted to talk about how to make a great villain in 5 steps today on Greyhawk Grognard. Villains are some of the most captivating characters in fiction. You know, you've got great villains like Dracula, Magneto, Doctor Doom, Darth Vader, Thanos. You know, these really great, perfect villains that almost make you want to root for them, and that's a real key to making a great villain for a game, which is slightly different than making a great villain for a novel, which we'll get to in a sec. But I wanted to give 5 examples of how to make a really memorable, good villain, and a couple of ways to subvert that. So you'll see what I mean in a minute. So the first thing is that no villain is ever a villain in his own mind, right? To the villain, to Magneto, to Darth Vader, he is actually being a hero. To Khan Noonien Singh in Star Trek, you know, the best villains aren't villains in their own mind. They're not. The worst kind of villain is one who's just a villain for the purpose of being a villain. The kind of like mustache twirling, absolutely, just despicable for the sake of being despicable. He or she is obviously just written to be just awful because that's what a villain is supposed to be. Those are the boring kind of villains. The really good villain has in his own mind, his or her own mind, I need to keep saying that, the idea that they're doing this for a noble cause. They are a hero to themselves and a lot of times to their followers. So keep that in mind when you're putting together a great villain for a set piece or for the capstone or even for the midpoint of one of your adventures, is that the villain shouldn't just be a villain for the sake of being a villain. You can have those. You can have, just run-of-the-mill bad guys, who are just like stooges of the big bad guy. But the real, if you want a memorable character, just make sure that he doesn't think he's the villain. Now, in a fantasy game, obviously that is subverted somewhat because, especially in a game like Dungeons & Dragons, you have creatures like demons or devils or daemons or things like that literally are physical embodiments of a particular ideological ethos. So, and there are planes of existence like the abyss that literally are made of the stuff of chaos and evil. And chaos and evil are not just abstract concepts in that kind of multiversal arrangement. They are literal physical things that are, they're not abstract, they're not relative, they are absolute, and they are real. You wouldn't be able to have a spell like Detect Evil if evil wasn't something that that was physically radiated, physically detectable. Like I said at the beginning of the segment, nobody's a villain in their own mind. So if you were looking for evil, nobody thinks they're evil. Nobody wakes up and says, you know what, I'm really evil today. No, evil in the sense of the game is its own palpable thing that radiates out from a certain locus, in this case, the outer planes. So in this case, you can subvert the everybody's a hero in their own mind by having creatures and to some extent you can have more human-like characters do this. But they are really the embodiment of a particular ethos. Like Demogorgon or Orcus or something like that is an example of this, where it's not just because they have a goal that makes them evil or whatever. They are literally spawned from the source of literal chaos and evil. And that's where they get their, that's what makes them a villain. So you subvert the nobody's a hero, a villain in their own mind with the idea that there are creatures that are simply evil for the sake of being evil because they were spawned from physical, literal evil. And I just wanted to very quickly remind everybody that the Kickstarter for my new book, the 10th anniversary edition of Castle of Mad Archmage, is now live. It'll be live for the month of July. It is a all-in-one volume of everything that's ever been published for the Castle of Mad Archmage, plus some new stuff that's in there. It's been completely re-edited. The OGL is gone. Everything has a stat block now. So do check it out. The link will be below. It is madarchmage.com. Check it out, please. Your support is really, really appreciated, and you will only be able to get this book during this Kickstarter. Now, next up is to make sure that the villain has a understandable and at least plausibly attainable goal. A villain who's just out to kill people, for the sake of rapine or whatever, that makes a dull villain. You want to have a villain who actually has a plan and is doing whatever they're doing in order to advance that plan and reach a particular goal. The James Bond villains, especially the earlier ones, are really good examples of this. You see Goldfinger, Auric Goldfinger from the film Goldfinger. He has a goal. His goal is he wants to increase the value of his own gold supplies to make him richer. That's something that's very understandable, it's very doable, and he's got a pretty complex plan to make that happen. But the plan is in place to attain that specific goal. Now, he's got some other things going on too. It's not just like that. It's not a monolithic, this is my plan and this is all I'm doing. He's got other things going on the side. And in fact, in the film, it kind of, he gets hoisted by his own petard, because if he wasn't doing these side things, if he wasn't smuggling gold from England into Europe, he would never have attracted the attention of MI6, and Bond would never have stopped him from the bigger real plan that he's got to detonating a nuke inside Fort Knox. So you can have these goals and objectives that define the character, but give them an actual reason to do what they're doing. And this kind of harkens back to the goal, to the first idea that nobody is a villain in their own mind. Because, for example, Magneto, he does what he does because he has a plan. His plan is to make sure that mutants are safe. And he goes about it, he has all these horrible ways of doing that, but it's always there's a plan. In the first X-Men movie, for example, he's got the mutant making machine, and he wants to turn all of Earth's leaders into mutants so that they'll be more sympathetic to the mutant cause. It's a very understandable, graspable, this is why he's doing this, and he's got a real valid reason to do it, and that makes your villain much more understandable. To take it into the D&D realm, we'll take a look at the Drow Giants series of adventures, G1 through D3. You have this very elaborate plot that is hatched by Eclavdra Isleserves. And the reason she wants to do this is that she wants to take over the Vault of the Drow. She wants to take over Errol High Kinlu. It's a very understandable goal. And she's actually got a motive for doing that, because she was rejected when she wanted to be made queen of the thing. So now she's going about it a different way by serving the elder elemental god. So she's got an understandable goal, and that is what is driving what's going on. That's why the giants are attacking things, is because she wants to create this realm on the surface that will give her power to take over underground. So you have these really attainable, understandable, realistic goals, rather than my goal is just to kill as many people as I can. Why? Because I want to. That makes a bad villain. That makes a boring villain. But when you give the villain something to strive for, it also gives the heroes, the PCs, some way of thwarting that villain other than killing them. You can just stop Eclavdra from taking over the Vault of the Drow by stopping the giants. And then you have to go in and stop her from doing other things, but that is why that is why you're going against the giants, is to stop this. Even if you don't realize it at first, that is part of the plan, and that is a great way to unfold the plan to the players over the course of time, is by having this plan that they see the little fringes of, or the beginnings of, and then later on the whole thing is revealed to them. Now, in order to subvert that, you could, in D&D terms, you can have somebody who is just insane. that they are literally, that is what drives them. And this goes again back to the first point, that there are some creatures in the multiverse that they simply exist to express evil or express chaos, and the way that is done is through murder and rapine. So you can subvert that idea by just having things that are literally either insane, or they are literally manifestations of an ideology that promotes evil for its own sake. And that way, that is a way of subverting that. Now, the third thing that makes a really great villain is having a backstory. And this goes back to the first 2 points, is why did the villain go on this path, right? What steps led this villain onto the path of villainy? As we said before, not everybody thinks they're a villain in their own mind. So, most people who end up villains started off as relatively ordinary people. Look at Voldemort in Harry Potter. He starts off as Tom Riddle. He's got this kind of dark edge to him, but he's a student at Hogwarts, and he progresses further and further, and you see flashbacks of his story, and you can kind of chart his fall. Same thing with Anakin Skywalker, who becomes Darth Vader. Is you see what he was, just an ordinary kid, then he was just an ordinary Jedi. Not an ordinary Jedi. He was a Jedi, and then he, in the final act, is pushed over the brink because he has these feelings for Padme and so forth, and Palpatine uses those against him. So we see this progression from ordinary person to even hero, and then the fall. And we want to see that in a well-developed villain. What's his backstory? Why did Iklavdra decide to do what she did? It's because she was very powerful. She's full of hubris to begin with, and because of the culture she's raised in, dark elves are uniformly evil, and that's why the exceptions like Driz Do'Urden make that stand out even more so. But she's brought up into a culture that respects power and authority and so forth. And when she is rejected, because in her mind she is the most powerful, so naturally she should lead, that leads her to then reject Lolth and go off to the Elder Elemental God and concoct this whole plot. So her history feeds into her story, and even in her own mind, she is justified because of course she should lead. She's the most powerful. So it all comes together. And the one thing that you have to remember on this is that none of these 3 things that I just mentioned, not one of them, will matter at all unless you give the PCs an opportunity to find out, right? You can have a 20-page backstory for your villain written up in your dungeon notes, but unless there is an opportunity for the PCs to learn about it, then it's wasted effort. You might as well not bother. And it's not sufficient to even give them an opportunity to learn it. They also need to be given the information that there is something to learn. It's like, hey, if you want to know about Iklavdra, there is a backstory there that you could learn. If you want to learn about Darth Vader, he has hidden his past, but his past still exists, and perhaps there are people who know that Darth Vader was Anakin Skywalker, and you could learn this dark past. Magneto has a well-developed history in World War II in the concentration camps. You could find this out. He doesn't exactly hide it. So you need to give the PCs opportunities to find out the history and the motive and the plan, and you also need to give them you also need to let them know that there is something to find out, because without those 2 things, they're just going to go in blind, and they're not going to know that there's a deeper motivation behind this villain that will turn this villain into something really special. Now, another thing that we see a lot of times, especially in film and TV, is you give your big villains some identifying characteristics. When you're DMing, if you're the kind of DM who likes to do voices, I try to do voices when I can for my NPCs. You can give them a distinctive style of speech, some sort of accent or some sort of phraseology that they use that will distinguish them from other characters that they run into. You see this in comic books a lot. Magneto has a very flowery, self-important kind of speech pattern. So does Doctor Doom, and he always refers to himself in the third person. Doom does not approve of this. You dare defy Doom, that kind of thing. So you could use these kind of verbal cues to let your players know, that to self-identify. Okay, this is the villain talking. There's something going on here that's special. You could also subvert this, however, because there's always the opportunity or the possibility that the villain is actually in disguise. And this is something I love to do, whether it's an illusion or a physical disguise, or you just don't realize that the villain's been your henchman or the guy who's been tending the mules all along. You have that big reveal, and that's a way to undercut and undermine the idea that the villain has some identifiable characteristics. Is that there's the possibility of disguise or illusion or whatever. We see this in one of the Gary Gygax novels with Gravestone, the demonologist, who is this high-level magic user cleric who summons demons and so forth. He's incredibly powerful. He's created all these demi-planes and so forth, but he's also got several different disguise personas that he uses in Greyhawk. One of them is a kindly old shoemaker or something, and another is like a sage, and they're all kindly. You wouldn't think anything of them if you met them in the street, and that's intentional. So you have these opportunities to rub shoulders with the actual villain without realizing that it's the actual villain, because they're in disguise or they're incognito, or you just don't know what the villain is supposed to look like. So that's a way to undermine that and add even more little bits of specialness to your bad guy. And the fifth thing I would say, and this is something that you see in Gygaxian dungeons a lot, is that the bad guys are like those Russian nesting dolls, right? There's always something else inside. There's always another layer to the onion. There's always something behind the something behind the something. We see this especially in the Giants and the Drow. You're going against hill giants, and then you realize, okay, there's something behind the hill giants because you find that scroll from someone called Eclavdra. Then you go on to the frost giants, and then you realize, okay, there's something behind them, and then you go to the fire giants, and there you actually see the Drow for the first time, who are the people behind the whole thing. And then you have to actually go to the Drow city, and you find all these different things going on. So there's always like layers and layers and layers of villains that, okay, I killed the big bad guy, but there's another big bad guy behind him, and there's another one behind him. You can use that to really establish a sense of dread. It's like, okay, this was a really tough bad guy to fight, and oh my god, now we know that there's somebody behind him. You see this in Bond sometimes, where you have like a villain like Jaws, who is a henchman working for either Drax or Stromberg, or you have Oddjob, who's working for Goldfinger. You have these villains, but you have villains behind the villains. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. So that can also be a way of kind of ratcheting up the sense of peril, because okay, we stopped this one, but now there's something stronger behind that. So you're kind of keeping up as the players get higher in level. The bad guys, become more threatening behind them. And that's always a really good thing. And you can also, if you wanted to undermine that idea, you could have something where the villains are all exactly identical. Something like the Borg before they came up with the Borg Queen. In Star Trek, you could have this, just horde of they're literally all the same creature. You could have hordes of humanoids, or you could have like the Darrow are a good example of this. I always picture them as kind of these, not mindless, but very regimented, and everybody has a place in society, and nobody really stands out except that they're sages. So you have this horde of near identical creatures that are going after you. There's this, the idea there is that there's no one particular villain that you can focus your attentions on, because there's just this homogenous mass of bad guys that you have to deal with. So you can once again you can undermine that. So anyway, that's what I've got, the 5 ideas of how to make a good villain. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What did you think of the of this idea? What do you do with your villains? Do you have any particular villains that you've created over the years that have stood out? I'd love to hear what they were like in the comments. Do let me know, and hope you enjoyed this one. Have a wonderful day, and stay safe from Pinkertons.
Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store where you can buy my books, and my blog where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day.